Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite books that I read in 2022. So this is a video that I know I've done in the past on my channel, but I think I do it like every other year. I remember to do it. So I don't think I did it last year. I'm not sure if I did it the year before that. I think I did it consistently for like the first 2 years that I had my channel, but sometimes I remember to do this video and sometimes I forget. So I picked out 5 books that for me were like the best of the best that I read in 2022. When I've done these videos in the past, I would normally pick out 10 books, but that was back when I was reading like 70 to 80 books in a year. This year I only read 50 books, and when I looked back on the books that I read and some of the ratings that I gave them, I think I had rated 17 books 4 stars, and that's obviously not including 5-star or 4.5-star reads, but 4-star books that normally would end up on like a top 10 list. I looked back on some of them and I could not remember genuinely what some of them were even about, and that seemed to happen a lot this year where I would read a book, I would give it a high rating because my enjoyment of it at the time was really high, but then looking back on it, it ended up being quite a forgettable book, and those are not the kind of books that I want to put in a favorites video like this. So these are 5 standout reads. Also, they are not rereads because I would say about half of the books that I gave 5-star this year were actually rereads, and I don't include rereads in this video. So these were 5 standout reads. I enjoyed them at the time. I look back on them and I still think of them fondly, and most importantly, I can still remember what they are about. So without further ado, let's jump into the top 5 books that I read in 2022. Emphasis on these were books that I read in 2022. They did not necessarily release in 2022. In fact, I don't think any of these released in 2022. And for this list, I'm not going to put them in any particular order. I think some of them I probably did enjoy a little bit more than others, but they also kind of arrange in genres, so I enjoyed all of them for various different reasons, so we're not going to go in any particular order. So the first book that I have to talk about is actually a graphic novel, and it's the only graphic novel that is going to appear in this video, and that is Beautiful Darkness. Now, this title pretty much sums up this graphic novel perfectly. This is a beautifully dark story. I've heard it described as like an anti-fairy tale. The illustrations in here are both absolutely beautiful and adorable, and yet gory and dark at the same time. So in this book, we follow our main character, who is called Princess Aurora, and at the beginning of this book, she is sitting down to have tea with this prince when all of a sudden the room starts to drip red, and we then learn and see these characters running out into the wilderness, and they're running out of the body of a dead little girl. So obviously this is very dark, and we continue to follow these tiny characters. It's quite a big cast of these little character critters that are now trying to survive in the wild for the first time, and we watch as they kind of turn on each other in their means to survive, and also sometimes just for no reason at all. And this can get very, very dark at times, but it is portrayed in a way that is very cute and just kind of looks like something that would be made for children, but it's actually very dark. I've never read anything like this. It's not a graphic novel I've ever sort of read before, and I really, really enjoyed it, and it really took me by surprise because I don't think I've ever enjoyed a graphic novel this much before. Next up, we have Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is a book that kind of borders between being a thriller and a horror. I guess it just depends on what kind of reader you are and how many of those you have read before as to whether you consider this to be a thriller or a horror book. I think it kind of combines elements of both of them, so that's what we're gonna go with. This book definitely has the vibes of Haunting of Hill House, the TV show, which I thoroughly enjoyed, so I kind of expected to really enjoy this book as well. I've also read Riley Sager in the past and loved his work, so it wasn't really surprising that this would end up on my favorites for the year. So in this book, like I said, very similar to Haunting of Hill House, we're following a woman who, when she was a child, her and her family lived in this house where these strange things started to happen, and they fled the house in the night, and her father wrote a book about what happened in the house. As she's gotten older, she's kind of forgotten what exactly happened in the house and thinks that maybe her father actually made up a lot of the stuff that he put in his book. long story short, her father ends up passing away and leaves the house to her, so she has to return to this childhood home of horrors, supposedly, and try to find out, like, was this house actually haunted, or was her father just making all of it up? So, like I said, I just really enjoyed this. I really love Riley Sager's writing. I think he has a way of writing, like, really gripping stories from beginning to end. This also was written in a really interesting way where it kind of has alternating chapters between following our main character called Maggie, and then also some of the alternating chapters were actually her father's book that we get to like read as the story unfolds. I thought that was a really interesting way of telling the story. So yes, this is my second Riley Sager book that I've read, and I have adored both of them, so I'm really hoping to pick up more from this author in 2023. Next up, we have The Silent Patient. This is definitely considered a thriller book, and it's not very often that I come across a 5-star thriller, so I was really pleased when I read this book earlier this year, or last year at this point. So in this book, we're following our main character, who is a criminal psychotherapist, and he ends up getting a job at this particular like mental rehabilitation or like mental institute. I don't know exactly what the correct term for it is, but he goes there specifically because he wants to speak to this one patient called Alicia, who previous to being put in there seemingly lived like the perfect life until one day she violently murders her husband and then doesn't speak another word after that. So he goes there because he wants to try and get her to talk and figure out what happened to her, why she did this, and why she hasn't spoken another word since. So this book was just incredibly gripping from the moment I started reading it all the way to the end. I was so invested in the plot and the characters, which is like the best of both worlds for me as a very character-driven reader. So I just thoroughly enjoyed this. It also had lots of twists and turns in it right up until like the very end. It's one of those books that will like twist you on the last page, and most of them I didn't see coming or really predict them happening. So this was just one of my favorite thrillers that I have read, and like I said, I don't come across like 5-star thrillers often. Like I'm more likely to give a book 4 stars because usually there's something about a thriller that I won't like, but really I can't name a single thing about this book that didn't work for me. So 5 out of 5 stars. It was one of my favorites of the year. Next up, and you guys will not at all be surprised to find this on this list, we have The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. As you guys know, I've been reading through the Lord of the Rings trilogy over the last couple years. I've been reading about one of them a year, so now I have finally completed the trilogy, and I just absolutely loved this. Like, I think having been such a big fan of the movies and like really growing up with the movies made me just love the story and the characters even more. I think if I had read this first before ever having seen the films, I would have struggled quite a lot with the writing style of this, but because I was already really familiar with the story and the characters, I just absolutely adored every single second of this book, even when the writing was a little bit much at times, is a little bit draining to read. I still just loved every second of it, and I do talk a little bit more about specific things in this book that I enjoyed in my December wrap-up, so if you want to hear me talk a little bit more about this book, then you can check out that video as well. Then the final book that we have to talk about, I don't actually have a physical copy of it because I had to get it from the library, but that is The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. This is a collection of novellas that is a prequel to the Throne of Glass series, so I am slowly but surely making my way through that series, but I finally read up to the point where people recommend to pick this up, because even though this is a prequel to the whole series, you have to read it at a certain point so that you don't spoil yourself for things that happen later on. So I finally got up to the point where it was a good time to pick up this book, and I am so glad that I did, because I actually think that this is my favorite book in the Throne of Glass series so far. We get to see Selena. This book basically perfectly describes how Selena becomes the character that we know her in the series and the assassin that she becomes. Like, it really perfectly explains why she is the way that she is in how we know her in the later books. And there's also like a bit of a love story in this book that is also incredibly heart-wrenching. So there was so much about the story that I enjoyed. There was so much about the story that would be considered like a fun time. Like, it was genuinely super fun to read. But then in the next second, this book was so heart-wrenching for reasons I won't spoil you for, but this was just such a good read for me. Like, I'm so glad that I decided to pick this up, because I'm sure that technically you could read through the Throne of Glass series without reading this, but like, you have to pick this up if you're reading through Throne of Glass. You gotta read this book because it was so good. So yes, those were the top 5 books that I read in 2022. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what your top 5 books would be that you read last year. I would love to discuss them with you in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!